Good afternoon. Welcome to the McFarland Public Library and to our presentation from Blue Willow Chinese Dance. My name is Tang Shige.
And my name is Chen Wanhong. That's my Chinese name, means 10,000 red. So I picked English name, Joy.
We're here this afternoon to do a program for you about Chinese culture and Chinese dance. We appreciate being here. We always enjoy doing these sorts of performances. This particular performance is supported by the the Center for Southeast Asian Studies at UW-Madison. And we're so pleased that they allowed us to participate. Thank you. Enjoy. I believe that this will be set up so that after we are done, you're going to be able to submit questions to the library. If you have questions for us, don't hesitate to direct the library staff to get in touch with us, and we'd be happy to answer them. Okay, thank you, and on with our program.
你好, hello.
And enjoy the dance, and you will learn and participate too. Thank you. 谢谢.
Okay, some very, very quick introductory information. The history and culture of China is almost entirely revolving around feeding people, having wars, and having families. That's the whole story. Basics of Chinese geography. On this overlay map, you can see that China is about the same size as the United States in terms of land mass. There are areas in northern China, up in Harbin, near Mongolia and Manchuria, that are very, very cold and snowy, just like in Maine. There's a very large area in southern China that is much warmer, more humid, very much like Florida, except even warmer. And so with this huge landmass, there are two odd things going on that tell us a lot about how Chinese culture works. One is that in spite of the fact that this landmass is about the same size as the United States, China actually has less croppable farmland than the United States does, about 1/4 less. But the population of China is 3 times that of the United States. And so it is the case that almost half to 2/3 of the population in China are still farmers because feeding people is really important when you don't have a lot of land and you have a lot of people. So that's some basics, but to dive straight into the fun stuff, what we have for you right now is a jasmine flower dance. This is kind of a Chinese court dance. This is a very classical Chinese dance. Okay, so on to a quick discussion about Chinese farming. The Chinese diet is primarily plant-based, not quite vegetarian, but almost, because it takes a lot of plant material to produce meat. And when you don't have as much farmland as you would like, you cut to the source. So this is a very typical farming scene in China. This is taken from a major highway just south of Shanghai. In Chinese, farming is very much what we would think of as gardening. Very labor intensive, lots of hand labor, machinery. China now leads the world in the production of sub 40 horsepower tractors. That is, tractors that are maybe twice the size of a lawn tractor. But an enormous amount of work is still done by hand. This is another farming scene. This is near Hangzhou in south central China. And the thing that impressed me when we were in China is that almost no land goes to waste. Over the course of centuries, these small terraces have been built so that steep ground that we wouldn't think about trying to farm. I mean, I grew up in southwestern Wisconsin. We wouldn't bother trying to farm this. It's just too steep to work. But over centuries of hand labor, it's been shaped into small terraces. Each one is farmed separately. The smallest of these terraces is probably the size of your living room, maybe a little bit larger. Land just doesn't go to waste in China. Another scene, the Chinese agriculture, if you will, also from the Hangzhou area. I'm standing on a city street on the edge of town when this picture was taken. And so in the foreground is a vegetable garden with lots of leafy greens and lots of vegetables growing. In the middle distance is a small orchard, probably. I didn't get a chance to check, and I should have because I love persimmons, and I suspect that may have been a persimmon orchard. We'll see. And then clear up on the mountain on really, really steep terrain. Again, terrain we would never think of trying to farm in the United States, is all laid out almost certainly in a tea garden. The long rows of shrubbery on sloping land. There's a classic terrain for a Chinese tea garden. And in fact, this is a tea garden. This is a very famous imperial tea garden in the Dragonwell region of China, about 100 miles inland from Shanghai or so. That is, when China was an imperial country, this entire area, and this garden in particular, was a tribute garden. All of the tea harvested was specifically directed towards the imperial household. Because when you were in China, if you were part of the imperial household, nothing was too good. So the tea is grown on bushes. The bushes are usually pruned, so they're about head height or so, and they are constantly picked so that new small leaves are forming. And it's those very new small leaves that make the very highest quality tea. You can't talk about Chinese food without talking about rice. Rice is another crop in China that's insanely labor intensive. Paddy rice, as it's called, one of the peculiarities of paddy rice is that it's enormously productive, but once it starts growing, if the roots ever dry out, the plant dies. It's just done. And so once the rice is planted, the paddies have to be flooded on a regular basis, which means they have to be perfectly flat, so that water will flow across them properly, and then the water needs to be actively managed. So with this kind of work, an acre of rice can produce probably twice or 3 times as much food as a wheat field in the United States. Because food is so important, it's built right into the culture. So what we have for you now is a Chinese harvest dance. A couple of things to know about this. First of all, Joy is going to do the dance twice. The first time you can watch and learn. The second time, you should make it a point to get up and make sure that you have a little room around yourself from, brothers and sisters or people that are visiting, because we're going to play the music a second time. Joy is going to do the dance a second time, and you can dance along with her the second time around. Since it's a harvest dance, it's intended, it's choreographed for villagers, not for professional dancers. So it's a simple dance. It involves a lot of repetitive movement, and especially it involves a lot of energetic movement. So.
And if you can find a room, a spare scarf, and can have fun later.
It's not difficult at all to imagine centuries of people getting together in the village square at the end of a successful harvest, knowing that there's going to be plenty of food to eat for the winter, and doing a dance exactly like this. So now it's your chance, your time to join along and dance with.
So basic step, have a scarf on the hands. So we do down, down, up, low, low, up. You just keep moving. This is the first step. Second step, forward, up and down. Forward, backward, up and down. The third step, you love that. Side to side, show your hip. Simple. Okay, now next step, imagine you walk in the field. You just throw the hay. Ooh, or the leaf in the ball. Throw it. Throw. Okay? Now next step, you love that. Use your energy. Down, down, jump. Down, down, jump. Higher you can. Okay? Final step, almost. Call the people. Call your friend. Come having fun. Come having harvest party. And finally, everybody happy. Make a big circle. And there we go. Are you ready? Good? Let's play the music.
谢谢. Thank you for dancing with us. All right, the next part of our program, we need to talk about another important part of Chinese culture, which is that of Chinese dragons. They're very different from Western dragons, and they play an important role in Chinese farming, as we'll talk about. In Chinese mythology, there are 9 different dragons. We're not going to talk about all 9 of them. You really don't. You don't need a lesson deep in Chinese mythology. But it's important to note that there are 9 dragons that enormously powerful beings that can fly and have superpowers, as it were, that are very important to Chinese culture. We'll spend some time talking about 2 of them. You can't talk about Chinese dragons at all without talking about the Fuzhanlong. By the way, long is the Chinese word for dragon. Okay, so now there's your first word of Chinese vocabulary. The Fuzhanlong is kind of the master dragon, as it were. Fuzhanlong is deeply wise, deeply experienced, is always portrayed chasing or playing with a pearl of spiritual energy, of wisdom. And so if you're an emperor in China, if you're a scholar, if you're an administrator, constant seeking of the wisdom of the Fuzhanlong and prayer to Fuzhanlong is an important part of essentially of your civic duties, seeking wisdom, seeking knowledge. For the rest of the country, for the vast majority of people in China that are farmers, the Shenlong is the dragon of note. Shenlong is also a spiritual being, is very knowledgeable and very benevolent. But in particular, Shenlong controls weather. Shenlong is believed to control the wind and the clouds and the rain. So if you're trying to go grow paddy rice, and once it's planted, you need regular rainfall every 3 or 4 days to keep the paddies healthy, prayers to Shenlong are a central part of your spiritual existence. So with Shenlong in particular, and with China being so focused on agriculture, Shenlong plays a particular part in Chinese culture, especially in the spring of the year when rice is being planted. And when you've grown your rice seedlings, you're going to move them into the paddy. You want them to grow well. They need to have rice, and they need to have rain, and need to have regular rain. So there are lots of different events in China that are dedicated towards tricking Shenlong into showing up and making rainstorms for you. One of them is the Dragon Boat Festival that happens in many parts of southern China around the time of the summer solstice, which is to say about the time that rain gets less predictable in China, or in that region of China. And so at that point, one part of the festival with the Duanwu Festival is a series of dragon boat races. And these are huge canoes. They're 50, 60 feet long. They hold 10 to 30 people. If you're a paddler like I am, they're just a ton of fun. But especially, they're built to look like dragons. Because one of the things that every Chinese person knows is that Shenlong he's kind of a bossy sort of guy. And other dragons showing up in his territory, that's not acceptable. That's not going to happen. So if you can trick Shenlong into thinking that there are other dragons, running around in your village trying to create trouble, Shenlong is going to show up and chase them away, and he'll bring a rainstorm with them. So, drinking a yellow Realgar wine is frequently brewed for this festival, and a particular style of dumplings is also traditional as part of the Duanwu festival. But the most important part, of course, is getting the weather doing what you want, having the dragon boat races. One of the dances that you might see at a Duanwu festival is a flying rainbow ribbon dance. When you see this, it will be really easy to understand why. This dance is done with two 35-foot long silk ribbons, and it's not difficult at all to imagine two dragons fighting, trying to get Shenlong to show up and give you a rainstorm. Shixie, and the flying rainbow ribbon dance. It's hard to imagine that Shenlong could possibly stay away from that sort of dragon fight. So if it rains really hard this afternoon, it's all our fault. What we have here for you is 4,000 years of Chinese history all in one slide. If you were a student in China, you would be expected to memorize this, probably in about the 5th or the 6th grade. You can't possibly consider yourself Chinese without understanding that You know, when Europeans were living in caves and banging bones together, there was already a Xia dynasty, an imperial dynasty in south central China that was an organized government that managed a significant chunk of the area that's now Yunnan province. And then since then, there have been 11 other major dynasties, 12 different dynasties in Chinese history. Now, the fact of the matter is that the first dynasty, the Shennong dynasty, we're pretty sure that Shennong is mythical. Shennong was the emperor of China in 2737 BC, and Shennong was kind of the Thomas Edison of his time, and everything important in China was invented or discovered by Shennong. He taught the farmers how to grow rice. Shennong discovered that tea made a refreshing drink. All this important stuff was all his doing. Now, strangely enough, the Xia dynasty about 4,000 years ago, for the last 300 or 400 years, it's been assumed that the Xia dynasty was mythical, that it didn't really exist, that it was just a story about how great the Chinese people were 4,000 years ago. But in fact, just in the last decade, archaeologists in China have discovered the remains and the artifacts of a very ancient city precisely where the Xia legends say that city should be. So we're completely rethinking what we know about that era of Chinese history. And then from there, a number of other dynasties. These are literally complete changes of government. One family is overthrown and another family takes over. If you bear in mind that the United States has been a country, a dynasty, if you will, for about 230, 240 years. The shortest of the 12 dynasties in Chinese history lasted longer than that. So this goes back a long ways. If you spend much time in China talking about how great America is, you're probably going to hear back some kind of snotty feedback about, well, you know, what about the other 3,800 years of history that you guys don't have? So one artifact that lots of people know about Chinese history and Chinese change of dynasties, the Xi'an warriors are a little symbol of probably one of the most revolutionary events in Chinese history. The Emperor Qin Shi Huang in about 220 BC, that is 2,200 years ago, was the first emperor to unify what we think of now as generally the landmass of China. He literally ruled over the entire world that he knew about. He thought he was a pretty important dude, and in fact he was. So he came into power in about 248 BC. Just 2 years later, he was sure he was going to be a phenomenally important dude. Just 2 years later, started the planning and construction of what would be his tomb. That work went on for 20 years. By the time it was done, it involved 700,000 workers. The spiritual practices that Emperor Qin ascribed to said that what you were buried with was what you took with you in the afterlife. In other words, you can take it with you. That's what he believed. And so his tomb literally included an entire army. He was the master of all he surveyed while he was alive. He intended to conquer heaven and be the master of all he surveyed when he died as well. So the Xi'an warrior tomb includes 8,000 life-size terracotta statues. Chinese archaeologists just did some very, very clever image analysis and video work and confirmed that it is true that every one of those 8,000 soldiers is different. from the other 7,999. It was buried with 130 chariots, 520 horses to pull the chariots. It was buried with an entire army. A more recent artifact of Imperial China, the Great Wall of China, is actually one of a dozen different walls. Chinese governments have been building walls in between China and Mongolia for 2,000 years, trying to keep out Mongolian herders who were also horse warriors and were kind of great cavalry soldiers. So what we think of as the Great Wall was built in the Ming Dynasty, that is in the 1600s. It's literally two separate walls. And the area in between is packed down, it's covered with brick, so it's literally a 1,500-mile long highway across northern China through mountainous terrain. It's an amazing sort of construction project. But of course, we know that the wall kind of worked until a Mongol emperor bribed the guards at one of these stations to open the gates and let his army in. So walls only work so well. But in Imperial China, the focus of everything in Imperial China is the Forbidden City in Beijing. The Forbidden City is an area a half a mile by 2/3 of a mile in size. It's completely walled off. This is one of 3 monstrous courtyards that are the focal points of the Forbidden City. And each of these courtyards is surrounded by buildings, temples, workhouses, kitchens, etc., etc. At its height, the Forbidden City was the White House and the Congress and the Pentagon and the Department of Labor and the Department of Agriculture and a few other minor sorts of things, all in one complex. 10,000 people lived in that Forbidden City and ran the entire country of China. And on high holidays, the emperor would sit here under the symbol of the temple of spiritual harmony, and arrayed in the courtyard in front of him, he could review 5,000 troops all in one place. The history of wars and warriors and dynasty change is so written into Chinese history that we've actually ripped it off, as it were. You may be familiar with a Disney movie, Mulan. So as it turns out, as near as we know, Mulan actually did exist. A 12th century poem by Guo Jian explicitly refers to a Chinese history from the 6th century that has never been found, that tells the story of a teenage girl who joins the army pretending to be her father, so that her sick father won't be drafted into the army, and she will serve in his stead. As near as we know, that's real history from a real story from a real country. So with this, of course, it carries through into Chinese dance. So we brought for you a Chinese sword dance. One of the things I'm going to point out, as Joy is doing this dance, you will hear lots of foot stamping. And if you go to a fencing competition today, you will see the same sort of thing happening. That's done all the time. The idea being that when you're actually fighting with somebody with a sword, maybe you can distract them with that noise and they'll make a mistake. So we have for you a Chinese sword dance.
And now I make a note that most questions ask me, is this a real source? I'll tell it, it's a real source. But when you practice at home, find a wooden piece of the spoon or stick to practice with. Enjoy.
Xixi. Thank you. A Chinese sword dance. The next portion of our program focuses on a Chinese legend. The story goes that lo these many years ago, when Shen Nung had invented or taught the farmers how to grow rice and how to make sense out of living better because they could have food when they needed it. The farmers came to Shen Nung and told him that they were having some problems because they were really confused. They didn't know when they should be planting. They didn't know when they should be harvesting. They needed Shen Nung to invent something for them that would help them be better farmers. And so he thought about it a long time, and Shen Nung invented the first calendar for Chinese farmers. But since everybody knows, at least if you're Chinese, that the world operates in not 1-year cycles, but in 12-year cycles, farmers could make sense out of having a calendar that helped them keep track of a year. But how to keep track of the 12-year cycle was much more complicated. And so Shen Nung decided that the Chinese zodiac, the 12-year cycle that rules the universe, would be built around animals that the farmers were familiar with. So that carries on now. You can say, for example, I was born in the year of the rooster. That's supposed to tell you something about me, that I'm bright and charming and witty and sometimes vain and sometimes not easy to talk to. The idea is that the year that you were born in is supposed to be able to tell people something about your character. So, how did the Chinese zodiac come to be the way it is? That's the story of our legend. So, farmers showed up and explained to the emperor, the Yellow Emperor, that they were just having a real problem with this. They were, and could Shen Nung figure something out for them that would help them make sense out of things? And he thought about it a long time. Shen Nung was a very wise man. He didn't do anything without thinking about it a long time. And he finally decided, yes, we can create a Chinese zodiac. So each of the years in the 12-year cycle will have its own identity. And the easy way to make sense out of this is to name the years after different animals that farmers are familiar with. So he announced to all the world that he was going to create a Chinese zodiac, and he was going to name it after animals. And the way he would decide which animals were part of the zodiac and how it would work was it would have a big race. And all the animals were invited to show up. And they would race across the field and over the mountain and past the rice paddies and swim the river, and then come to the finish line. It was a tough race. It was kind of maybe the first triathlon, except that they didn't have bicycles. So lots and lots of animals showed up. The first two animals to show up were the cat and the rat. The cat and the rat were the best of friends. They were just largely inseparable. Now, the cat knew that the rat could be kind of sneaky and tricky sometimes, and play practical jokes. And the rat knew that the cat could sometimes be, lazy and sleeping a lot of the time. And the cat just couldn't stay away from fish. But they got along with each other very, very well. So, and then the cow showed up, or the ox, not very bright, really pretty strong, just kind of garden variety sort of stuff. Who else showed up? The sheep showed up, and the monkey, all attended. The dog and the horse showed up, We have the rooster, the noblest of all animals, showed up. The rabbit showed up. The tiger showed up. I want to save this. The pig showed up, which is kind of surprising. Nobody really expected the lazy pig to kind of get it together and show up in time for the race, but he did. The snake slithered in. And yes, Shenlong showed up, the dragon. So we have the whole line up here. We have, that there are only 12 years in the Chinese zodiac. 13 animals showed up. Somebody is not going to make it. Who's not going to make it? Well, we'll find out. So here's the story. The animals are all lined up. Shen Nung announces they're off. They go running across the mountain. They go by the fields. The river turned out to be kind of a mess. And that's where it all fell apart. As it turned out, sneaky rat at the very beginning going, I don't know, running and swimming and all that. This is going to be a challenge. And so the rat caught up with the ox and persuaded the ox to carry him. Now, a more competitive animal might not have put up with this, but, ox is really strong, but he's not necessarily the brightest and sharpest knife in the drawer. So, yes, he agrees. And, of course, because the rat is going, the cat is going along for the ride. No doubt. So they get to the river first. The ox with the cat and the rat riding on them. The ox is swimming across the river. Did you know ox can swim? Yes. Yep. They're great swimmers, at least in Chinese mythology. And as they're going across the river, the rat has been plotting all this time, and he finally decides that, okay, here's how this is going to work. And they're sitting on the ox's back, and the rat points off into the river and shows the cat that there's a fish down there. And the cat is staring at the fish, and the rat pushes him overboard. So,
And who will be first?
So, the cat is out of the running at least for a little while. Cats don't swim very well. So the ox goes running up to the finish line. He thinks he's got it all put together, and just as he's getting there, the rat runs down his back, hops off his nose, and the first year of the Chinese zodiac is the year of the rat.
Shu, rat in Chinese called Shu. The rat is number one zodiac. So
And the second animal of the Chinese zodiac is the ox, because he got kind of the gate out of things.
Niu,
So,
Niu, the year of ox. Niu.
not surprisingly, third in line is the tiger. Fast, strong, fearless. Tigers can swim. Yes, they can swim very well. And so the third year of the Chinese zodiac is the year of the tiger.
Hu.
Now,
Number three.
and nobody really expected the rabbit to be number 4. But he was. The story is that, of course, the rabbit runs very well. And so over the mountain, past the fields, that all worked out well. When the rabbit got to the river, he found a log and hopped onto it and was being carried along by the current, but this didn't quite work out as he plotted. Fortunately, just as he was about to go too far down the river, a friendly wind showed up, blew him to shore. The 4th year of the Chinese zodiac is the year of the rat.
Two, the year of rat. 2.
Now, what the rabbit didn't know was that the friendly wind was created by our buddy Shenlong, the dragon. And so the 5th animal of the Chinese zodiac is the dragon. Now, this was kind of strange. I mean, dragons are the most powerful of all animals. How do you end up being number 5? The emperor asked what was going on, and Shenlong explained that, well, I was flying along and making some pretty decent time, but the farmers, boy, things were getting kind of dry and they needed a rainstorm. So I made them a rainstorm. And then as I was coming along, I saw 2 different rafts on the river, and they weren't doing so well. So I blew them both across to shore so that other animals would be able to participate in the race. The kindly, noble Shenlong not only saved the farmers, he also saved a bunch of animals. So the 5th year of the Chinese zodiac is
Long.
yes, indeed. Okay. So next up, no surprise whatsoever, is the horse. Fast and strong, able to swim, all that sort of thing. What the horse didn't realize was that the sneaky snake had wrapped himself around one of the horse's hooves. Just as they're getting to the finish line, the snake uncoils himself, slithers across the line, and the horse is so terrified that he creates an accident. And the 6th year of the Chinese zodiac is the year of the snake, and the 7th year is the year of the horse.
蛇，yellow horse，马。
Okay, so Shenlong had reported, not one raft with a rabbit on it, but 2 rafts. And as it turns out, the other raft was, the 3 animals that are least likely to be effective at swimming. The monkey and the sheep and the rooster all did kind of okay on the race. When they got to the river, life was a little complicated. Monkey went out and found some branches and logs. Rooster found some vines to tie them together into a raft. And the sheep kept them all entertained and kept them all dedicated by singing energetic songs to keep them working hard. So they built their raft, they launched it on the river, and it wasn't going so well until all of a sudden this friendly wind showed up and blew them to shore. And so when they got there, the emperor's going, well, how do we do this? And we ended up with the Chinese equivalent of eating my milk. So that we have here the sheep,
羊，
and the year of the monkey,
猴，
and best of all, the year of the rooster. So,
鸡，
and then, so that leaves 2 animals left in the running. The 11th animal across the line was the pig. So we have the year of the pig. And, this wasn't that hard to figure out. Even Shenlong understood that, pig found some nice tasty stuff to eat. And then there was a mud puddle over by the paddy, and he had to take a little swim. And so really not really high up on the list, but still part of the race. And the last is the year of the dog, because in Chinese mythology, dogs are even lazier than pigs. And so, whereas the pig probably, he stopped for a snack and then he played in the mud puddle a little while, the dog found, was really, really fast and running really well, but then he found something to eat, and he had a snack and it made him sleepy and he had to take a nap. Sleeps almost as much as the cat does, by the way. And so the 11th year of the Chinese zodiac is the year of the pig.
猪，
And the last year, the 12th year of the Chinese zodiac, is the year of the dog.
狗，
And as noted, there is no year of the cat. The cat got tricked, dinked out of being first or second or third in line, and forever after, cats and rats have been mortal enemies.
fight each other.
And this is the story of the Chinese zodiac.
谢谢。
So. Okay, so the last thing we want to talk about for you in terms of Chinese culture and understanding how Chinese culture works, we're going to talk about the Chinese New Year. And just like, not all families even celebrate Christmas. And lots of families celebrate Christmas in lots of different ways. That's true in China as well. But if you were to do the whole program for the Chinese New Year, it would look like this. First of all, the last week or two before the New Year starts, the entire house gets cleaned from top to bottom. If you're going to paint the house, this is considered a lucky time to do that. If you want to show off to your neighbors, you don't put up Christmas decorations. You hang big red banners, wishing everybody a happy and prosperous New Year, wishing them good fortune for the New Year. And because it's considered really, really bad luck to use knives on the first day of the New Year, a lot of the food and cooking is prepared in advance, especially lots and lots of dumplings. And a Chinese dumpling is a little bit different from what you might guess. You may have seen Chinese dumplings. They're pastry wrapped around a small amount of filling, and the reason they're the shape they are, and the reason that they're so important at Chinese New Year, is because in Imperial China, centuries and centuries ago, all of the gold in the Chinese treasury was molded into these kind of shapes like this, or gold coins were put in baskets shaped like this, and they look kind of like dumplings. So you can't celebrate Chinese New Year without having lots of dumplings on the table. So 1 week before the Chinese New Year, you go to the kitchen, 2 weeks before the Chinese New Year, the kids are going to sneak into the kitchen. Every kitchen has, every good kitchen, has a little poster of Zhao Jun, the kitchen god. This isn't, Zhao Jun isn't as important now, but before the invention of gas and electricity, the only way you cooked was to have a wood-burning stove, was to have a fire going. If the fire ever went out, it was just awful getting it rebuilt again. So Zhao Jun, the kitchen god, keeps an eye on the stove and makes sure it never goes out. In the second week before the Chinese New Year, the kids are going to sneak into the kitchen to Zhao Jun's little shrine here, and they're going and they put fruit on his little shelf there, candies, sweetened nuts. They're bribing Zhao Jun, quite frankly, because 1 week before the New Year, Zhao Jun is ceremoniously brought down from the wall, goes into the fire, and is burned up, and a new poster of Zhao Jun goes up, and the smoke of Zhao Jun will float to heaven and report to the Jade Emperors how the kids have behaved in the previous 51 weeks. So, there are some legends that are universal. So on the New Year's Eve, that's when things start happening. You open all the doors and windows in the house. You're going to give every opportunity for all your bad luck and your poor fortune and all of the evil spirits to get out of your house. You're going to give every opportunity for good luck to make it into the house. And because spirits are kind of touchy, starting on New Year's Eve, you use no knives in the house. You wouldn't want to accidentally injure a good spirit and cut your good luck in half. All the brooms are put away because you wouldn't want to accidentally sweep some good luck out the door. So all of these preparations have to happen. And then New Year's Day is going to be a huge feast. All the relatives show up. And the ritual is that, okay, so the kids have bribed Zhao Jun to tell sweet things to the emperor, and auntie and uncle are going to show up, and all the relatives are going to show up, and when they do, the children are going to greet them with
恭喜发财，新年好 ，wish prosperity and happy new year。恭喜发财，新年好。
and in reward for being such a charming and polite child, auntie or uncle has a red envelope to give as a New Year's present. And always, ever, never anything but the red envelope is
with new money.
Brand new, clean, crisp money.
And
of course, just like in your family, Junior holds on to this for about 38 seconds, and then Dad or Mom will grab a hold of it, and that will go into the savings account. And your chances of spending any of it on candy and such is not very good.
So just like the United States, and you get Christmas gift from your dad, from your grandparents, auntie. In China, kids will get red envelope in real money.
So and this is the ritual when every senior relative shows up. And the more important that person is in the family, the more the greeting, and the more ritualistic the greeting, and also the larger the gift they're expected to show up with. There are obligations involved here. So, and then if you do the whole program after that, the Chinese New Year continues for 2 weeks, for 15 days. On day one, the new kitchen god goes up. New poster of Zhao Jun goes in the kitchen. On day two, no matter how much father dislikes his mother-in-law, he cannot stop his wife from visiting her mother on day two of the Chinese New Year. It's just tradition. The second day of the New Year is also the common birthday of all dogs in China. They celebrate all the dogs' birthday at once. On day 5, feast is dumplings, special dumpling feast. Day 7, Renri. In Chinese culture for centuries, everybody celebrated their birthday on Renri, the 7th day of the Chinese New Year. And then day 9 is an entire day dedicated to temple, dedicated to prayers to the Jade Emperor. And then the last day, the Lantern Festival. Everybody hangs new lanterns. One last big blowout feast. Rice dumplings and rice soup. And all sorts of crazy fun. The eve of Chinese New Year is kind of, it's just crazy. Let me just put it that way. My brother-in-law, Joy's brother, gets a Chinese satellite, and on New Year's Eve there's this hours-long program. Everybody who's anybody is either in the audience or performing. All the most important officials are in the audience, and at the end, Chinese invented fireworks. Gunpowder and fireworks were an invention in China about 1,400 years ago. So the one last thing that you have to do right at midnight on New Year's Eve is blow off a bunch of fireworks, scare off all the bad spirits, and just get them all out of the way. So to close our program, we brought for you a traditional Chinese New Year's dance. The sort of thing that if you join my brother-in-law for New Year's Eve and spend 4 hours watching Chinese TV, you might see a dance very much like this.
Wish for the good luck to your life, to your home, and to the library. 谢谢。
Thank you for coming. We're glad you could join us, learn a little bit about Chinese culture, see some Chinese dance, play with some stuffed animals, and generally have a good time.
And you learn 4,000 years of Chinese history in 1 hour. You can see and practice. Send a message, send question to library. Hope we can answer your question or Google it.
So, 谢谢.
谢谢
Thank you for having us.
and 再见 See you again.